This hearing of the Government Information, Justice, and Agriculture Subcommittee on first-class mail delivery standards will come to order. On July 28th, the U.S. Postal Service began a nationwide reduction in the amount of first-class mail that it delivers overnight. This month, the Postal Service will start taking 3 days to deliver some of the mail that traditionally has been delivered in 2 days. The Postal Service talks about making similar reductions next year in the standards for the delivery of second-class mail. When I heard that the Postal Service was lowering delivery standards, several possible justifications came to mind. I wondered, is this done to save money? This would be logical since the Postal Service presently seeks to increase rates by an average of 19%. But then I learned that cost savings aren't the reason. In fact, no projected cost savings from the reduced standards are reflected in the current rate proposal. Then I've wondered, perhaps, is the Postal Service responding to an inability to deliver mail in compliance with its own standards by reducing the standards? But that's not the reason either that the Postal Service gives for making this change. The service says that it's making the change because that's what its customers want. It claims that its market research shows that the mailing public prefers consistency of service over speed. I wonder about that explanation, and I'm additionally concerned that slower delivery will hit hardest in rural America. Coming from a rural state myself, I know firsthand what this can mean, and I'm concerned, does this mean that West Virginia, or much of West Virginia, will be one day further behind? I look at the testimony coming from the Postal Rate Commission, and I see that, for instance, many of the SCFs in our region, over half, will be one day further behind than they were originally. This morning we are fortunate to have Postmaster General Tony Frank with us to explain the motivation behind the slower standards and their impact on the public. We'll also hear from Robert Cohen of the Postal Rate Commission. The Postal Rate Commission recently issued an opinion advising against implementation of the slower standards. Testifying as well will be Stephen Gold of the Postal Rate Commission's Office of Consumer Advocate. We're delighted to also have with us Mo Biller, President of the American Postal Workers Union, John Mapley of the Nashua Corporation, a mail-order firm that employs over 800 persons in West Virginia, and Carrie H. Bauer of the Reader's Digest Association, Incorporated. We welcome all of you, and Mr. Frank, I just want to thank you very much for taking the time. You've got a very busy schedule, I know. You made time for this subcommittee, and we appreciate your willingness and to come before us. At this point, I turn to, we're very honored to have with us the ranking member of the full committee, Frank Horton, for any opening statement he might wish to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm happy to be with you. I serve, of course, as an ex officio member of this subcommittee, and unfortunately, because we don't have any votes today, the subcommittee members are probably out in their districts doing things that you and I probably should be doing, but here we are having this hearing, and I want to congratulate you on having the hearing and tell you you've got a who's who of the Postal Service here. Not only do I serve as ranking member of the Government Operations Committee, the entire Government Operations Committee, but I also serve as the ranking member of the Postal Operations Subcommittee of the Committee on Post Office and Civil Service. So I'm quite familiar with these witnesses that are going to be testifying today, and I'm quite familiar with the concern and the problem that we'll be talking about. And I understand we're going to be talking about the new first-class mail delivery standards. These standards, which were implemented on July 28, have resulted in the shift of approximately 5% of all first-class mail from overnight to two-day delivery service. An additional shift of from 5 to 10% of two-day first-class mail to three-day delivery standard is scheduled to take place this month. While the proponents of these new standards assert that they were developed to modernize an out-of-date delivery service and satisfy changing consumer needs, I am concerned that the changes are simply a poorly justified service reduction. This concern is amplified by the pending proposal to increase postal rates, and that's what you hear back in the district. I will look forward to hearing more about the Postal Service's survey and their efforts to involve the mailing public in developing the new standards, and I also anticipate a frank discussion of the Postal Service's unwillingness to provide a much-needed cost-benefit analysis to support these recent changes. It's my hope that today's session will help clarify these issues, and again, I commend you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Horton.
And I look forward to having the testimony of the Postmaster General and all of the witnesses that you've scheduled for the hearing today. And I certainly want to welcome the Postmaster General, who I think is doing an outstanding job. It's a tough job, and it is really one where you have to have a pretty thick skin. And I'm not sure your skin is thick enough yet, but it's getting thick. Glad to have you, Tony.
You get to be I think you get the height of an armadillo after about a year in your position. Mr. Frank, so as not to prejudice any witness that ever comes before the subcommittee, we have a practice of swearing in all witnesses. Do you have any objections? If you'd stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please proceed. Your written statement in its entirety will be made a part of the record, so if you want to summarize in any way.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Congressman Horton, for asking me here today on this important matter. As you indicate, the full testimony will be accepted in its entirety. I would like to briefly summarize that prepared testimony. Mr. English. Shortly after I became Postmaster General in March of 1988,
Go ahead.
I began to hear complaints from mailers, customers, about inconsistent first-class mail delivery. In looking into this situation, I found that the problem was caused in part by our delivery standards. Those standards have been created almost 2 decades before, without much, if any, attention to customer opinion. In point of fact, nobody was asked. Since then, of course, transportation, mail processing, and customer profiles have changed significantly, and mail volume has about doubled. But the Postal Service has never made a concerted attempt to reflect these changes in its delivery standards. I concluded that we had to improve our first-class mail performance and asked Postal Management to conduct a thorough examination of what delivery standards postal customers needed and wanted. We asked our customers and how to achieve those standards. In early 1989, in February, we conducted a test in the New York metropolitan area. Market research indicated that customers were less interested in overnight delivery to distant points and more interested in consistent overnight service in their local area. And incidentally, when we asked them what local meant, invariably their definition of local was narrower than ours. New York delivery standards were realigned accordingly, and service improved. We also realized operational benefits. The percentage of mail handled on automation increased, and mandatory overtime was greatly reduced. At the same time, we undertook a massive research effort in which we asked over 27,000 business and residential mailers about their first-class delivery needs. The research showed that people do want speedy delivery, but that this need was limited to what they defined as their local area. We learned that consistent, reliable delivery is very important to our customers. The research also showed we were not meeting this need. We also examined the operational impact of the existing delivery standards and determined that those standards actually undermined our ability to serve our customers' needs. Based on the market research, the operational information, and the results of the New York test, we concluded that the Postal Service should adjust overnight and two-day delivery standards to reflect customers' needs and provide more consistent service where it was needed. I want to emphasize, as your remarks have already reflected, that the realignment program was not and is not a cost-cutting measure. It was undertaken to respond to change and within reasonable limitations to provide the kind of service the American people told us they wanted. We undertook the realignment process with, I believe, an extraordinary amount of care. To establish standards that were truly customer-based, we included customer contact and input as an integral part of every phase and focused the process on local customer contact and decision-making. What evolved from our dialogue with mailers and the input of local postal managers was a set of common-sense adjustments which maintain overnight delivery in the local area and which provide more consistent service. Although we had originally projected that the overnight changes might affect from 5 to 15% of first-class mail, the changes actually implemented affect only about 4.8%. If we exclude New York, the changes that were made last year, only 3.8% of first-class mail is affected. I notice that in his written testimony, the consumer advocate indicates that this is a non-event. A non-event. I was pleased to see that. I'm pleased also, this should not be lost sight of, that as a result of this process, we've been able to add new overnight delivery areas. Didn't just go from overnight to 2, we also went from 2 back to overnight. Of course, I cannot claim that every result we reached was exactly on target or that the process is perfect. Such a complex change always has a few glitches. I want to emphasize that the implementation of revised standards is not the end of our concern with the service that we offer to the American people. We are establishing procedures to review our standards every 6 months. If we make mistakes that are pointed out to us, we will fix them. As I explained in my testimony, the Postal Rate Commission also had a role in this process, based upon our request for their advice on the realignment plan. Although it was received late in the process, we considered the Commission's advice and concluded that in many ways we were in conformance with their objectives, as the testimony by Mr. Cohen, written testimony, indicates. So we received that opinion on July 25th, and we implemented our changes as scheduled on July 28th. Because of the disparity between the sweeping realignment envisioned by the Commission and the much more limited changes that we implemented, we believe that the Commission's criticisms are not relevant to the actual realignment that occurred. We also believe that the changes that we implemented were in keeping with the Commission's recommendations in favor of localized changes. In closing, I want to emphasize that the Postal Service remains committed to good service. Our last name is Service. And we're committed to customer satisfaction. I believe that our first-class mail service is first-rate, but it could be better. We would not be revising delivery standards unless we believed there was an opportunity to improve service to the American people. The realignment process provides the Postal Service with the opportunity to correct a problem in a sensible way. The result will be a win-win situation, improved mail service for our customers and improved efficiency for the Postal Service. I would point out that after the July revisions, the Postal Service is committed to deliver over half of the first-class mail in this enormous country overnight. There is no country in the Western Hemisphere that delivers even 1% of their mail overnight. We deliver over 50%. With all of the volume, we're 40% of the world's volume and all of the geographic complexities of this country. We have a lot to be proud of. We're trying to make it better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Frank. Let me turn to Mr. English to see if he has an opening statement he'd like to make.
I have no statement this time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Frank, just getting, as I say, right down to it, if the purpose is not cost savings, and if the purpose is not because there was a slippage of standards, then why is it that our constituents shouldn't be asking, well, aren't we just going to get less for more? Because this comes at a time when the Postal Service is petitioning for an almost 20% rate hike. And so it would seem to those mailing first class that you're saying you got a good chance of getting slower delivery and you're going to pay more for it.
Well, when we ask people what they want, as I indicated, the overwhelming choice was consistency. I want to know when I mail my mother's birthday card. I want to know when to mail the check in response to this bill, and so that it will get there and I'll not have a late charge. Those are the things that interest the bulk of Americans. We said to them, what about speed? And they said, yes, we want speed locally. We want overnight delivery locally. And then we asked, I thought logically enough, what's local? And in every case, their definition of local was much narrower than ours. The average area that we changed from overnight to two-day, Mr. Chairman, was over 100 miles away, over 100 miles. It's asking a lot when people mail late in the day, and we have the congestion that we do in our nation's cities for our people to meet for tiny, small, individual amounts of mail to meet that truck. And in point of fact, we didn't. And our service under our existing measurement standards to the outlying areas beyond 100 miles was poor and was inconsistent. By changing the standards, making them realistic, we have raised our standards. We expect the consistency of mail within the overnight area and outside, within the new overnight area, to be more consistent. We're shooting for the high 90%. And we have a standard that will be higher this year, 1991, than we've ever had before. So it is an improvement. It is what the customer appears to want. With respect to your question about the postage increase, my feeling about the postal increase is very clear and above board. The American people have no right to expect that their postage will not periodically go up, but they have every right to expect that it should go up at less than the rate of inflation. And to think that we're immune from the effects of inflation when we have 83% of our costs are people and a lot of the remainder are transportation and rent, just is fanciful. This 19%, I've been very candid with the American people, is deplorable. It's mainly a result of what occurred in 1987 and 1988. Not much I could do about that when I arrived, but I'm pleased to tell you that we're operating in 1990 at 2% below the rate of inflation compared to operating our cost increase at twice the rate of inflation in 1988. So we're making a dramatic improvement, but not dramatic enough to change the rate filing.
Well, I appreciate the survey that was taken and your statement that this is done in the interest of improved service. I guess people are going to have trouble understanding, though, how slower delivery is improved service. Particularly, have you done an evaluation of how this will affect different regions of the country? And I'm going to refer to rural areas. For instance, in my district, it's my understanding that 6 of the 13 sectional center facilities will go from one-day to two-day delivery. Maybe we're just a big lump of the 3.8% that are going to be affected, but almost half of the sectional center facilities in my region alone will lose a day. How is that improved service?
Because if you're in a two-day area, you will always, as far as I'm concerned, always get two-day service, not 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7-day service, which is what we hear from people, but always, A. And B, in the remaining overnight areas, which is over 50% of the country, that service will become more consistent, and so that people can count on their mail being delivered overnight. In Canada, which I guess is the biggest comparable we have in this hemisphere, it costs $1.95 extra to get mail overnight in the same city. We want to do it overnight in the same city and within a 100-mile radius, more or less, for 25 cents now and 30 cents in February.
The Postal Service has been in the process of installing high-speed machines, the optical character readers, the barcode sorters, some of them processing mail at a rate of, I believe, something like 30,000 pieces per hour.
Yes.
That's a lot faster than old hand sorting and some of the other mechanical means. My question, though, is with the coming on of this modern equipment, it would seem to me that that would permit keeping the standards and the higher, faster delivery times as opposed to reducing the delivery times. Could you explain that contrast?
Well, the automation equipment is working, working well. I was pleased to see in the opening statement of the labor negotiations that the two major unions applauded how well it's going. But the time window that we have to process the mail when you're seeking to make a truck that is trying to get someplace 150, even 200 miles away in times for the letter carriers to get the mail, that time window is very small. And in point of fact, we're not fully utilizing our automation equipment during the daytime when we should be using it, when we have our best people on, when we don't pay a shift premium. So it is the early leaving of the truck, if you will, to go on a journey of 100, 150 miles that causes the inability to use the automation equipment as efficiently as we would like.
One final question in this round of questions is going back to the sectional center facilities. I have heard that over 1/2 of them will be affected by the reduction of in standards. Is this true?
Affected in terms of employment?
No, well, affected in terms of, and that's a logical follow-up too, is to the extent that employment is a factor here, but affected in terms of losing time, going from 1 day to 2 day or 2 day to 3 day.
Well, some of the areas that they serve, I believe we have 11 of those in West Virginia, for example. Some of the areas that they serve clearly will revert to 2 day, but they'll have a greater responsibility to make sure that all the time overnight mail is overnight. I don't see it as a reduction in standards or a cutback in service.
But in terms of a reduction in delivery from what the standard was that the mail would be delivered in that time to what it would be when this is fully implemented, is it true that about 1/2 of the nation's sectional center facilities will be affected?
They'll be affected to the extent that some of the areas that they serve will go from overnight to 2 day, but as we see, it's less than a 4% impact. So yes, they'll be affected, but again, to use the term, it'll be a non-event.
Turn to Mr. Horton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's go back to the very beginning. There were standards in effect, and there was a standard that required 1 day delivery and 2 day deliveries, etc. Then there came a time when you proposed to change it. Why didn't you think in terms of trying to meet the standards that were on the books at that point? Was that an impossible task? Was it impossible to do that?
I believe so. Otherwise, we wouldn't have undertaken the examination. There's just been a lot of changes.
What brought this about? What brought about? I mean, how did you proceed?
Frankly, we were missing our consistency and the outlying parts of each area, 1, 2, and 3 day. We were missing, and you have to examine. Should something be engraved in concrete for 20 years and never re-examined, despite a doubling of the mail, despite new freeways, abandoned freeways, new truck routes, new airline routes, and all the things that change in this country all the time? And so
did you make a study of that?
Yes.
Who did that study?
Our staff, locally and in the headquarters, both. And we asked for indication.
Do we have a copy of that study? What did it entail?
Well, it involved, from the local up, taking a look at what made sense and what didn't, what had changed.
Did you get a document? I'm trying to find out.
I understand what you're driving at, and I guess it's hundreds of documents, because we brought it up from local up, and so it's not one document, it's hundreds of documents which we tried to pull together at headquarters, and had teams of people working. At first went to the region, pulled together at the region.
How was it presented to you? In what form? Did you have a memo or something like that?
No, it was done individually by management sectional, center, and then by division, and then by region, and then consolidated overall, the effects of it.
Well, was there some finding that that the standards that were on the books at that point were not being met? In other
Yes.
words, the one-day delivery, the two-day delivery, were those standards not being met? Was that what was being told as a result of these studies?
Yes.
Well, then, where did you come up with the idea of this consistency and then the changing of the standards? Did somebody make a study of that and come up and say, let's don't do it one day now, we'll do it 2 days? Or how did that evolve?
Well, we ask ourselves, how could we improve speed and consistency in the 1, 2, and 3 day areas, and how could we serve the twin objectives of our customers for speed and consistency? And basically, oversimplifying, because each part of the country is different, came to the conclusion, in effect, and this was a induction, not a deduction, that overnight delivery beyond 100 miles is just not possible on a consistent basis in so many of our communities.
Well, weren't there some communities where they were meeting these standards?
Yes.
Well, then why did you change those standards?
And we didn't. We didn't. As I say, the entire amount of the change, sir, was less than 4%.
Why did you do it nationwide rather than do it on perhaps a demonstration project?
Well, we did the demonstration project in New York.
New York City.
New York City, which after all is well over 10% of the mail of the United States, and it worked
Why
splendidly.
didn't you just change New York City rather than all the nation?
Well, there are plenty of areas of the country and plenty of cities that are unaffected.
Well, I come back to the original question. Why didn't you try to meet the standards rather than to try to change the standards? In other words, the standards that were on the books, why didn't you try to invigorate the Postal Service so that they would meet those standards rather than to change the standards?
The volume of mail and the changes that had occurred in the last 20 years made that impossible to do. Of course, we attempted to do that. We attempt every single day to do that. But clearly, Mr. Horton, you have a better chance to get 100% perfection in a small radius than in a large radius.
Well, it's gone over like a lead balloon, I want to be honest with you, because the people out there are looking at what the standard was, and they say now then you've relaxed the standard so it's not what it was, and where we used to get one-day delivery, we're not getting one-day delivery, we don't even get two-day delivery, and we get a different standard. And then, as everybody's saying, the postal rates are going up, and how come?
The
people out there, the conception, and incidentally, I saw about 3,000 people on a one-to-one basis in my district when I had office hours this January and February. And that's not a good time to have office hours in upstate New York. It's pretty cold. But people came out, and I was impressed that there was a great misunderstanding about this. Maybe you should have held off a little while and try to get some more affirmative information rather than to try to put it in place and get the comments and the sentiments that are abroad right now with regard to the Postal Service.
A part of the problem is that we announced that we wanted to take a fresh look. And of course, when you announce that fresh look, people have trepidation. And when you talk to people in January and February, they were imagining all kinds of things. Instead, you see the results, 3.8% change, a non-event. I wish we could have reassured people ahead of time, but how could we if we're taking a fresh look?
Well, I want to tell you it's not a non-event as far as the American people are concerned, because I think that generally throughout the country there's an attitude that there's been a diminishment of the Postal Service and that you're getting some bad publicity on it. Incidentally, I wanted to ask you about a letter from Mr. Gold who is a consumer advocate, is going to testify a little bit later. He enclosed with his testimony a letter he sent out October 12 of last year. I'm sure you're familiar with this, but apparently that went out to all 50 states. It starts right off, I think, a little prejudicial. It says, United States Postal Service is planning to, quote, degrade first-class mail service. I mean, that, after that, it's pretty well clear. But then he goes, on the basis of market research, the Postal Service has determined that mailers would prefer slower delivery of mail in exchange for greater consistency, which I guess is what you're saying. And then perhaps the citizens of your state feel differently. According to Business Mailers Review, a Washington Trade publication, next-day service will be limited to post offices served by a sectional center facility and so forth. And it goes on. And then it says, instead of flying, first-class letters will be trucking along from Chicago to Boston and so forth. A hearing on the Postal Service's proposal will be held before the Postal Rate Commission in Washington. What was your reaction to that being mailed out? Did they ask you, did the consumer advocate ask? And I have a high regard for the consumer advocate office. I think that's an important office. But did they talk with you about this before that went out?
No, we were never.
And what impact did that have?
Well, to answer your last question first, it fortunately had very little impact. Only one of the 50 states, in point of fact, chose to intervene. The letter was sent out within 2 weeks of our filing. I believe that on reflection, most everybody would agree it was a rush to judgment, a prejudgment before the hearing, before any of the facts became known, and I accept today's testimony by the same Consumer Counsel that says it's turned into a non-event. So it was a prejudgment.
Some of the newspaper articles are suggesting that there will be significant reductions in the number of postal jobs. Is that true?
No, sir. I don't for the life of me understand where that figure came from. Maybe Mr. Biller can shed some light on it when he testifies, but it's not the case.
You're also, I'm sure, aware of my long-standing concern about service reductions, especially with rate increases. You've heard me say it time and time again, and every postmaster before you that served while I've been on the Post Office and Civil Service Committee has heard me say it, how wonderful it would be if we could just reduce the price of stamps 1 cent. But with a continual increase and then now service reduction, and however you slice it, that's what the American public is thinking, does impact on this question of privatization of the Postal Service. And I'm deeply concerned about that. As we have service reductions, people start going out someplace else to get somebody else to deliver the mail. And then as the rate goes up, it's like the buses. When the rate goes up, the people find other ways to get to their destinations. They'll find other ways to get their letters and their information. Of course, the fax machine. They used to write to me and send me letters and tell me what their concerns were, but now they just fax it in, so it doesn't even go through you. I mean, I get it today. The bill's coming up tomorrow, this afternoon, and we'll get the fax this morning. So there's more and more of that going on. So that there's a obvious attempt to avoid the price increase and to get better service. And what I'm concerned about is the privatization of the Postal Service. Do you share that same concern that I have?
I don't share the concern anymore. I believe that one more postal rate increase of the magnitude, the one that being considered now by the Postal Rate Commission, would give some danger of that happening, but that's not going to happen. In point of fact, the volume of mail handled by the Postal Service is going up. Each and every month is going up. Yes, we know about fax machines, but it's going up. The volume of third class in the last month that happens to stick in my mind was up 6%, which means something doubles every 12 years. And our first class mail is up over 4%. The volume is up. If we provide good service at rates that increase less than the rate of inflation, we don't have a darn thing to fear from privatization. I don't think that privatization's got a prayer in the United States, and nor should it. We're going to run the Postal Service with career employees that hopefully will get some restraint in these labor negotiations. But if we improve service and keep our cost increases below the rate of inflation, the great days of the Postal Service lie ahead and not behind. The case at all. What we're saying is, if you're in a one-day area, expect one-day service. If you're in a two-day, expect two-day service.
But is it not, though, you are loosening the standards on which people have held the Postal Service to in the past? Is that not true?
I don't believe so at all. We're increasing our consistency standards. If you're in a one-day area, you ought to be getting the mail overnight. If you're 2 days, you should be getting the mail in 2 days. And our Board of Governors made it amply clear that in exchange for this small, very small, still over 50% overnight change, they want an improvement in performance against expectation.
And I guess the question then occurs, why do you think the Postal Rate Commission opposed this move? Why did they recommend against it? You know, if that's all that we're talking about, if in fact it's all benefits, it's all good, there's no downside to this, why did the Postal Rate Commission come out in opposition to it?
Well, I think part of the reason is that the way the rate proceeding works, we file a snapshot on September 29th, 1989, a snapshot, not a movie. And as we've already heard from my testimony and some of the written testimony, of course, market research and interaction with mailers has changed that filing quite a bit. I suspect, judging from Mr. Cohen's testimony, that if we were to file this case today, knowing what we all know now, both the Postal Rate Commission and ourselves, they would have a different advisory opinion.
Isn't it true, though, that really one of the major problems the Postal Rate Commission had with this proposal was that they felt that the research that was done by the postal system was seriously flawed?
Well, I think they keyed on a couple of items. I think they're incorrect, and if they'd update themselves on what we did. For example, they claim that the ordinary person can't distinguish between speed and consistency. To me, I can't believe that. But we set out and asked a number of people in consumer panels, focus groups they're called, and satisfied ourselves. Absolutely, those people understand the difference between speed and consistency.
That doesn't sound like the sort of thing that one would label as research being seriously flawed. Have you discussed this with the Postal Rate Commission?
No, we have grave legal problems in discussing things with the Postal Rate Commission when items are pending before it.
But on this particular case, if in fact they come back and make a recommendation against you proceeding with an action, that's not something that's before them. That's already been done. Are you telling us that the law prohibits the Postal Service from carrying on any kind of discussions with regard to a ruling that was made by the Postal Rate Commission and attempting to determine on what basis they made that kind of a ruling?
It's not a ruling. It was an advisory opinion. It came out, I think, 36 hours before we were scheduled to implement. We are severely, I'm not an attorney, we are severely limited with ex parte communications with the Commission.
It would seem to me that I'd be happy to yield to the gentleman.
On that point, they do have a pending now, a rate increase proposal. So that, I think, is what the Postmaster General is talking about.
That certainly complicates.
And that prohibits them from making contacts except in certain ways. So even though this may be a separate matter, they do have pending that rate case, so they would have some problems with that.
Perhaps that's something that we ought to take a look at, because it seems to me if there's an advisory opinion that comes from the Postal Rate Commission, there should be some way that the Postal Service should be able to explore a little bit as to why, particularly if they felt a research project was seriously flawed, why it was seriously flawed. And I suppose then the next question is, if in fact you get something back from the Postal Rate Commission saying that your research is seriously flawed, did your people reevaluate and examine that project? Did you bring in anyone from the outside consultants, as to how such projects are to be carried out and whether or not this project was carried out in a proper manner?
Yes, we did. And I would say I myself am a statistician from my prior life. The research was well carried out. It may not have been explained as well. It may have been modified after the snapshot was taken on September 29th, but this is good research.
One other question I suppose that occurs is, and I would imagine that this is one that is going to occur to most of our citizens, is what assurance do we have that these standards will be lived up to? You just got through telling us that the previous standards were not being met. I at least got the impression that that was one of the major reasons that the Postal Service undertook the consideration of changing those standards. And you've told us that the volume is increasing, although you've also told us that evidently with the mechanization that's taking place, that's going on smoothly, and that's supposed to improve speed, I thought, as well as accuracy. So I suppose that, is there any assurance whatsoever that the American people can take any comfort in the fact that by paying more money, changing these standards, that the new standards in fact are going to be met any better than the previous standards?
Yes, yes there is, considerable. First of all, I don't want to have a confusion in the public mind between this rate increase and service. This rate increase is going because our costs increased 19% in 3 years, and so we're having 19% rate increase. I have my own ideas what can be done to hold that down. I've already indicated to you that in 1990 so far, our productivity has gone a long way toward overcoming our increase in costs. But we're doing something very novel, very difficult, very frightening to some people, and that is we are going to, Mr. English, to 3 outside service measurements. Outside service measurements, one with Price Waterhouse, the big 6 accounting firm. We see them every year on the Academy Awards when they say the envelope please. Well, they're going to do the envelope please for us too. Only it'd be 1,200,000 envelopes per year. The Price Waterhouse will be mailing in ways that we don't know, to whom we don't know, from where we don't know. In other words, a truly external look. First time in the 215-year history, I believe, of the Postal Service anybody's ever undertaken this. And we'll be reporting those results to the American people. I don't think they're going to be very gratifying initially, but I think in a darn quick hurry they will be, because I know the people of the Postal Service won't stand to have poor scores. So that's one system, and I believe that report, the first report, which will be flawed a little bit by a break-in time, will be this November yet, and it'll be reported each quarter thereafter to the American people without any cosmeticizing by the Postal Service. Similarly, we're doing a customer satisfaction index, and you've seen the enormous consequence of customer satisfaction in the automobile business, where we have a major manufacturer in the United States advertising that they're number 5 in the J.D. Power Customer Satisfaction Index. Give you an idea how powerful that is. And we'll be doing a customer satisfaction index. We'll be getting 200,000 responses a quarter from individuals and businesses, how satisfied they are with our overall service, and that'll be done statistically so we can pinpoint it by breakdown of our divisions. And lastly, we are undertaking with the mailing industry an examination of on time and misdelivery for third class. Again, totally out of our control independent contractors. I'm very proud of these. I am told frequently by people in the Postal Service, you're giving our enemies something to beat us over the head with. And my response is, it's called the Postal Service. It's owned by the American people. Why don't we tell them how the service is? And so that's what we're going to do. And there won't be any fudging or fooling around or blending. And these will be issued by independent parties.
Be happy.
On this Price Waterhouse, how much is that going to cost?
That'll cost, for a 3-year period, I believe about $20 million. 3-year period, so about $7 million a year.
Was that something that was open for competitive bidding? Or was
yes.
So this was a competitive bid?
Yes.
And this was the one that was the successful bidder?
Yes.
And you say for 3 years that'll cost $20 million?
Yes.
What about the other two, the index, customer satisfaction index? Is that going to cost, or is that in-house?
No, these will all be external costs because they're being done by external people. The remaining two were done.
Who's doing that one? Who's doing that one? You said the second one was Consumer Satisfaction Index.
Opinion Research Corporation.
And is that also a contract that was competitively bid?
That's correct.
And how much was this one? Well, you can furnish it for the record.
Yes.
Later. And what about the mailing industry survey?
The mailing industry is also being done with an outside contractor, National Data Corporation, specializes in items such as this kind. It's a little more complicated because the mailing industry is contributing to that. We have 12 initial mailers that are each contributing $25,000, and we expect more to sign up. So it's a little more complicated.
What's the amount of that one?
Sir?
What is the amount of that one?
I'll have to furnish that for you.
Have you had any results? You started, what, July of this year?
Yes.
Have you had any results so far?
No.
So you have no information on which to base any kind of a statement with regard to whether it's successful or not successful with regard to the new standards?
That's right.
One other question, final question, if I may. I assume you're still paying a subsidy for 9-digit zip code, and if so, how much did you pay out in the last year in subsidy for people using 9-digit zip code?
We don't think of it as a subsidy. We think of it as a discount.
Well, it's a subsidy to use it, isn't it? If you use it, why you're going to get a reduction, then that's a subsidy. Yes. Somebody's got to pay for that, don't they?
Well, it's paid for because it saves the Postal Service more money than the discount we give. It involves more work by the mailer.
Well, last time I checked on that it's subject to question as to whether or not there's been that kind of a savings for a 9-digit zip code. How much did you pay out in subsidy, losses, discounts, however you want to look at it, for 9-digit zip in the last 12 months?
I'll have to furnish that for you. It's 1/2 of 1 cent for a 9-digit zip code. Can you give us roughly
a figure on that? Give me a rough figure as to about how much it was. You have no idea. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Frank, another reason the Postal Rate Commission disapproved of the recent standards, of the reduced standards, is that the Postal Service didn't include a cost-benefit analysis of the changes in the proposal. Why wasn't one provided?
Because we weren't undertaking this for cost-benefit. We were undertaking this for an improvement in service, and not as a way of saving money.
But whether it increases costs, reduces costs, or whatever, isn't it pretty difficult to undertake such a change without some analysis of what it's going to cost?
Well, as I indicated, the purpose was not to save money. Purpose not to reduce employment. There may be savings in this in terms of people working on the daytime shift rather than at night and so on, but we believe that they'll be negligible.
In response to Mr. English, spoke some about the Postal Rate Commission opinion and analysis that had been done. Was there an analysis done by the Postal Service of the PRC's opinion?
Well, certainly we've read it and reacted to it. It was received, I believe I indicated, I think 36 hours before we were scheduled to implement, so pretty difficult to react to it in that period of time. And I believe that our conclusions are quite similar to those of Mr. Cohen's, namely that the results of the entire operation are such that in many ways it meets the initial objections of the Postal Rate Commission, and as Mr. Gold has indicated in his written testimony, it's a non-event.
Well, I'll get to the non-event in just a second.
Sure.
It might be more of an event than a non-event. But my question would be then, if there is a written analysis that was done by the Postal Service of the Postal Rate Commission opinion, would you have any objections to supplying that for the record to the subcommittee?
No, not at all. And in point of fact, if we don't have such a thing, we'll prepare it for you.
Appreciate that. Now, in terms of the percentage that you've used, 3.8%, I believe it is, but yet that only reflects, I believe, the first stage of implementation. Indeed,
Yes.
Aren't you planning to implement reduced standards for second-day first-class mail delivery later this month?
Later in October.
In October?
Yeah.
And then what percentage of first-class mail will be affected by that?
I would say 5 to 7%.
So now we've gone from 4 to maybe 10%, 10 to 11%. Then aren't there plans for reduced standards for second-class mail delivery?
I heard your testimony. I'm not aware of that.
So you're saying that there are no plans for reduction of standards for second-class mail delivery?
Right.
Good. Is it true that New York City, under the new standards, it's going to take a first-class letter 2 days just to go from one borough to another?
I understand that that is not the case.
What I would appreciate is, and I will make this request of other witnesses too, is I have additional questions, but I would like to submit them in writing. We'll send them within the one-day standard. Would appreciate as much as possible an expedited response, simply because of the fact that Congress, we think, may adjourn sometime soon, and would like to get this report done before it does.
Sure.
Are there any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Mr. English.
I'm still having a lot of trouble, Mr. Frank,
Yes, sir.
with this. Just don't see that we can look at a reduction in delivery time, or excuse me, an increase in delivery time as being an improvement in service. That seems to me that's double speak. That just doesn't compute, doesn't jive.
Yeah.
And I've got real trouble with that. I guess the other thing that troubles me too, when you get the Postal Rate Commission coming back and seriously and saying that your study is seriously flawed, and I don't care if it is within 3 days or whatever it was of the time to implement, I'd think you all would put the brakes on this thing and take a good, long, hard look at it instead of just simply proceeding. We've had in the past, I just want to say this is not speaking of you, but some of your predecessors, we've had a tendency, I think, with some of the management of Postal Service to come up with a lot of in-house schemes that folks in the Postal Service management think are great ideas, and they turn out to be boondoggles. And they've got the Postal Service, particularly in the last 10, 15 years, have more than their share of those. We've got a lot of proposals that lie in a graveyard of supposedly great ideas that ended up costing the Postal Service a lot of money, which is reflected in the postal rates. And quite frankly, I approach any of these proposals that don't quite sound right with a great deal of skepticism. And I've just got to say that this is another one that just does not ring true. It's a big thud whenever this idea comes across as any kind of improvement in service to the folks that are using the Postal Service. I hope you're right, but I'll tell you, it sure doesn't sound right. and it sure doesn't fit my idea of improved service.
Well, sir, it's not doublespeak. We're not trying to con anybody. We don't have any great ulterior objective here. We asked the American people, what's good service? And they said, get it there in the same amount of time every single time so I can count on it. Get it there at the same. And then we said, well, what about speed? They said, yeah, we'd like speed in the local area. Then we said, what's local? They told us. I don't think that's doublespeak. The American people want overnight speed in a local area, and they want consistency above all. This will accomplish that. As far as the failures of the Postal Service, there have been some. I guess I took this job, leaving a comfortable hot tub in California, because I believed the Postal Service was in trouble. And I believed that it was in the range of possibility that it could be privatized if it didn't do better. But it's a $40 billion a year business, the third or fourth largest business in the United States. The way to avoid criticism, I suppose, is not to do anything. And plenty of corporations our size make mistakes every single day, and they go on, and they learn from their mistakes, and they go on, and that's what we're trying to do. Our productivity over the last 12 months has never been higher in the history of the Postal Service, and it's going on. It'll go on this quarter and the next quarter. Automation is working. Were there some missteps before? I must say it certainly didn't help before my time to have a vice chairman of the Board of Governors put in jail. That set the automation program back, as it would in any corporation. But it's working now. The unions grant that it's working. It is resulting in, I believe, a much lower postal increase the next time, and hopefully one that's stretched out more than we ever have. It is working. We're not flawless. We make mistakes, but this is not done for some ulterior motive. This is done to serve the American people better. If it isn't right, if we're not doing it right, we'll go back. I mean, we are going to look at this every 6 months and make sure it works.
Well, let me say very quickly, Mr. Frank, if in fact the Postal Service management does that thing right there, that simple thing, they find they make a mistake, they step in and correct it, that will be a big change of what I've seen in the Postal Service management in the last decade. So if that's what takes place, well, that will be a great improvement. Would you then be willing to go on record right here today with regard to the consistency question and give us the new standard? How much of an improvement can we expect with this plan in consistency? Give me a percentage of improvement.
Based on the only measurement that we have right now, which is our internal measurement, which wasn't really set up to measure this, we believe we can close the gap on that measurement by a third, between 100% and where it is now. But
so we'll have at least a 30% increase in consistency over and above where we have been.
The differential between where we are now and 100%, right.
In what period of time?
1991.
So within the next year?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Chairman.
Mr. Horton.
That line of questioning causes me to ask a couple of other questions. I have a little bit of difficulty in distinguishing between time and consistency. I understand what you're saying, but your new proposal, which is in effect now, does have time of delivery as part of the consistency. In other words, they want consistent one-day delivery or two-day delivery or three-day delivery. Now, they had one-day, two-day, three-day delivery. And what you at least your conclusion was that they were not consistent in that. So I don't know how you can separate.
We were not meeting our standards. I guess that's the easiest way to say it. We were not meeting our standards.
Well, that's time and consistency.
Right.
And I mean, maybe we're just quibbling over words. But what you're saying now is that you are going to have a better consistency rate with regard to the time of delivery. That's right. What you're saying.
That's right.
And what I'm trying to get back to was what information did you have, or did the Postal Service have, which made you believe that the time and consistency schedules were not being met? Now, I realize it's a big country, and New York City is one example. But New York might be quite different from Chicago or from Rochester, New York. As a matter of fact, I've got something that was in a Rochester paper that indicates that they just did their own little survey. They mailed out some letters, 15 letters to 6 communities, and they showed that next day, then 2 day, 3 day, this is right within Monroe County, which is where I live, and many of the towns 3-day delivery. Well, what did you have that indicated to you or the Postal Service that consistency and time were not being followed? And I think if we could have some sort of information from you that would indicate that was presented to you, and that we could compare with what we were going to be getting now as a result of this this three-pronged effort to check on consistency and time that you just referred to.
We'll be glad
I think
to
that'd
furnish
be
that
helpful
for
to
you.
us.
The further out the communities are, the greater the distance between pairs of cities, the less the consistency. I mean, it's,
But why didn't you have Price Waterhouse and the opinion group and the data group make those kind of studies of the old system before you moved forward?
well, the competitive bidding takes a long time. I wanted to do this in May of 1988 and finally got it done in November of 1990. It takes a long time. I wanted to get it done yesterday.
Thank you.
Mr. Frank, we thank you very much. You can understand the concern and genuine concern, because the perception is, I believe, that there is a slipping of service, that while you've been very careful to separate this from the rate increase, it has to be tied together in people's minds of we're going to be asked to pay more for service, and yet the standard of delivery is slipping. But those of us in many areas are not as reassured yet that it's only going to affect a very small percentage. Indeed, as I say, when I note that half of the SCFs in my district alone are going, in some parts of them at least, are going to have a reduction in the standard of delivery service. And the American people, I think, are going to be asking, what is it that we can be genuinely guaranteed one-day delivery? And we hope that it's not going to be an $8.75 express mail package. And so I was very encouraged by your observation or your remarks that you intended to review this every 6 months, and we look forward to getting back with you and seeing how it is being implemented. I just hope that you will take some of the considerations and concerns of the subcommittee and others in your deliberations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your appearance
sir.
here. The next witness will be representing the U.S. Postal Rate Commission and Director of Office of Technical Analysis and Planning, Robert H. Cohen. Mr. Cohen. Mr. Cohen, if you're going to be accompanied by someone, would you introduce them, please, for the record?
This is my colleague, David Stover, the General Counsel of the Rate Commission.
Okay. Well, both of you, if you have no objections being sworn, if you'd stand and raise your right hand. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Mr. Cohen, your entire statement will be made a part of the record. We invite you to summarize or proceed in any way you'd like.
Thank you. George Haley, the Chairman of the Postal Rate Commission, deeply regrets his inability to testify here before you. He hopes you will understand that he is presiding this morning at a hearing being conducted as part of the omnibus rate proceeding. The Rate Commission appreciates the opportunity to appear before you to testify about the Postal Service's change in first-class service standards. As you know, the Postal Reorganization Act requires the service to seek an advisory opinion from our Commission before making a nationwide change in the nature of service. Under the Act, we must, in these cases, give all interested parties an opportunity for a trial-type hearing like those we have in rate cases. When the service filed its case with us last September 29th, it sponsored the testimony of 3 expert witnesses. Later in the case, it sponsored 1 rebuttal witness. 28 parties intervened, and 4 of them provided testimony to the Commission. The Commission issued its opinion last July 25th. The Postal Service presented its case as a nationwide change in service. It showed that between 10 and 30% of overnight first-class mail might be downgraded to 2-day service. At the most recent Board of Governors meeting, PMG Frank described the current plan as being more limited than as described in the service's filing before the Rate Commission last September. Now it affects only about 8.5% of overnight mail, as opposed to the range of 10 to 30% that they included in our filing, in their filing. However, we do not yet know how much 2-day mail will be downgraded to 3-day, but the Postmaster General has now estimated it. He just now estimated it for us. The rationale the Postal Service provided for the service change to the Commission was not based on cost reduction. It was based on better meeting the preference of its customers for more consistent service, even if it meant sacrificing speed of service. The service claimed to know that their customers preferred consistent service to speed of service because of the extensive market research it had carried out. Based on the evidence in our record, the Commission found that the Postal Service could not make a valid conclusion from its market studies as to what its customers really preferred. The research was flawed because interviewees were given only an abstract choice between consistency and speed. They were not allowed to explain their desired balance of speed and consistency. Customers did not necessarily want to make large sacrifices in speed for very small gains in consistency. Further, the Commission felt that the word consistency was not defined in the survey and that the interviewees might not mean by the term what the Postal Service means. The Commission also concluded that the sample was statistically flawed because no special attempt was made to include large users of the mail in the sample. The Commission was disturbed that costs would be imposed on users of the mail because of the changes in service. For example, there would be an increase in float. No attempt was made by the Postal Service to quantify these costs and to balance them against its own savings. In addition, the Commission felt that the current levels of consistency, as measured by the Postal Service, were already respectable. It was not clear that a nationwide program of downgrading delivery standards was appropriate in an attempt to gain a few percentage points of improvement. Finally, the Commission's opinion in no way should be construed to be against localized adjustment of service areas where existing standards could not reasonably be met. On the contrary, the Commission felt that these sorts of changes were appropriate. This concludes my statement, Mr. Chairman. I will be pleased to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cohen. Has the Commission staff reviewed the cost implications or been able to review the cost implications of the proposed changes in overnight delivery standards?
We have not been able to review the cost implications to the Postal Service simply because we don't have the data available to do it.
Let me ask you about that. The Postal Service has continually denied that the restructuring of delivery standards is a cost-cutting measure. It keeps discussing the benefits that will result from the slower standards, such as improved efficiency, increased use of automation, and so on. It sounds to me as though there ought to be a savings. Shouldn't the service have included savings estimates from service standards realignment in the current rate case?
With the Postal Service witness, Patalunas, who is responsible for estimating test year cost, test year in this case is 1992, has stated in a response to an interrogatory in our case that they were not able to estimate at that point in time what the savings might be from the change in service standards. So they have not made any adjustment for it.
Do you think that they should have?
Well, we believe that the Postal Service should have estimated the cost savings from this program so that they could properly be balanced off against the service improvement to see it, and we think it should have been done in a classic cost-benefit type.
Do you think that they had the ability to do that?
Well, I think they could have estimated the cost in a reasonable fashion. Excuse me, they could have estimated the cost savings.
Has the Postal Rate Commission taken a look at how the changes in overnight standards will affect rural areas?
We have not done that specifically. I would just note for you that over half the FCF pairs, that's the sectional center facilities, those are the units of the Postal Service, a geographic unit which with a centralized facility in them, are affected by the plan, yet only about
Is that nationwide?
nationwide. Over half of these combinations, there are about 400 some odd of these SCFs, over half the connections are affected by the changes in service, but relatively little of the volume is affected. That indicates to me that rural areas are heavily involved in these changes, disproportionately involved in the changes.
In an adverse way?
Yes.
I've heard suggestions that by slowing by 1 day the delivery of some first-class mail, the Postal Service will be able to eliminate the first-class mail that takes a really long time, such as 6 or 7 days to be delivered. Was there any evidence of this in the Commission proceeding or in what was presented to the Postal Rate Commission?
There was no evidence that I recall that was directly on that point, but by inference, the Postal Service believed that they would get more of their mail processed on the automation equipment that they had, and they also claimed that, and I believe it's also true, that the automation sorts more accurately than the other mechanization and manual sorting that goes on. And as a result of that, there should be fewer missorts, which account for a large number of a large amount of that tail of the distribution that you were talking about.
Mr. Frank, in his testimony, said that the Postal Service had received the Postal Rate recommendation, or the Postal Rate Commission's advisory opinion only 36 hours before implementation. I think the implication being that there was a long delay there and that they would not have time to either analyze or implement some of the PRC's recommendations at any rate. It took, I think, 10 months for the Postal Rate Commission to review this. Is that an inordinately long time or something unexpected?
I don't believe so. As I said previously, the Rate Commission is required by the statute to provide a trial-type hearing in this proceeding. A trial-type hearing requires time for intervention, time for or written cross-examination of postal witnesses, time to cross-examine postal witnesses, time for the interveners to file their own testimony, and then for the Postal Service to conduct discovery on those witnesses, for them to be cross-examined, for the parties to put on rebuttal testimony, to have that written cross-examination done against that, finally have the rebuttal witnesses testify, and then time for briefs and reply briefs. And finally, the Commission gets some time to write a decision. I don't think 10 months is inordinate for such a procedure. I would point out to you that when the Postal Service was asked to file a procedural schedule, they filed a schedule which did not take the entire case into account, but just through the parties filing their own cases, the intervener parties filing their cases. And that was called for in January by their original schedule, and yet we still had to conduct cross-examination after that of those parties, have rebuttal testimony, have briefs, and yet their original schedule also called for this thing to be implemented on February 10th.
Well, Ms. Cohen, I just want to say to you on the rate increase, you all take all the time you want. Don't you feel you have to rush that 20% rate increase through?
I would remind you, sir, that the statute requires us to take 10 months.
You take every minute of it. You spoke in your testimony some, and the Postal Rate Commission did, of criticizing the Postal Service's market research. Would you elaborate on that, some specific criticisms of that research?
Yes, sir. To begin with, the pivotal point that the Postal Service wanted to make was that consistency was the single most important element to their customers, far more important than speed. They based that on a single question in a about a 30 to a 40 questionnaire. The question said something to the effect, and I quote here, "Which is more important to you, the speed of first-class mail delivery or the consistency of first-class mail delivery?" Now, there was no explanation of the terms, speed or consistency, prior to asking that question. There was nothing in the questionnaire concerning speed, concerning the concept of consistency prior to asking that question. And it simply hit the interviewee cold. There's no evidence that the interviewee had any idea what what was meant by the concept of consistency as being employed in the questionnaire. And the 75% of the people said they preferred consistency over speed. That doesn't mean that they used the word consistency as the Postal Service interprets it. Furthermore, and most importantly, the interviewees were not given the opportunity to balance off cost and speed, speed and consistency. Any improvement in consistency at tremendously slowing down the mail or just willing to slow down the mail a little bit to improve consistency, these kind of trade-offs were not presented to the interviewee, and hence we don't believe that the interviewee's responses were formed a suitable basis to make the to make that kind of conclusion. There were other problems with the surveys as well. There was no attempt made to stratify the sample so that the large users were proportionally counted. They simply surveyed in a random fashion businesses and households. Yet we know that under 1% of the businesses account for a huge fraction of the mail. The banks, for example, alone count for about 6% of all mail sent and about 5% of all mail received. There was no, and the banks were very adversely affected, so they claimed in our proceedings, by these changes. There was no special attempt made to weight the sample so that banks were included in their, in anything like the amount of, in proportion to anything like the amount of mail that they covered.
Sure.
I very quickly just wanted to ask you, was this, were these points made to the Postal Service when you made your criticism?
Yes, sir. They're all included in our
So they're well aware, it's
opinion.
fully explained as to what you found about the study that made it seriously flawed.
Yes, sir.
And when Mr. Frank testifies before us, and I think he gave some little example, was the only thing that he could come up with that he was aware of that that you had as a criticism. If he wasn't aware of it, certainly the Postal Service was well aware that these were the problems, and this was clearly explained, and this is the reason that your study isn't any good, right?
Yeah. How many pages did we devote to that, David?
It appears in the Commission's advisory opinion, starts on page 23 and runs through page 35.
So they had 12 pages of explanations of the flaws, the serious flaws that the Postal Rate Commission found with the Postal Services study, right?
Yes, sir. Part of it is discussion of the testimony of witnesses for other parties who offered criticisms of the Postal Service research, and in one case presented a piece of market research done by that party, which seemed to point to an opposite conclusion.
I've got to say, Mr. Chairman, I'm disappointed that the Postmaster General either wasn't aware or didn't see fit to reveal to the committee here the fact that this kind of flaws that were laid out and explained to the Postal Service. Evidently, the Postmaster General didn't know anything about it. So he better check with some of those folks that work for him. Evidently, they're either deceiving him or they're not informing him, and some heads ought to roll over the Postal Service over this, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
The did you have any other observations concerning the survey?
No.
The market research. And was there a question on there that said how would you like to get the service that you're already supposed to be getting, but you don't think you are?
I don't recall that, sir.
Well, I don't think it was on there.
I don't think so.
I mean, because that goes to what Mr. Horton is, I think the point he's been making is what was wrong with the standards that we had. Why didn't we try to meet those as opposed to saying we'll slip the standards in some areas?
As I recall the questionnaires, there was nothing on them that went directly to that point.
Mr. Horton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Postmaster General, when he testified, said that your testimony indicated that this was a non-event. Where did he get that?
I think he was referring to the consumer advocate testimony.
Do you think this is a non-event?
Well, I'd like to point out that the scope, at least of the changes in overnight mail delivery standards, is below the lower bound that the Postal Service estimated when they filed the case last September. Last September, they said between 10 and 30% of the overnight first-class mail might be downgraded. And as the Postmaster General estimated here today and before the Board of Governors, only 8.5% of that mail is being downgraded. I believe that...
Well, we don't know that. I mean, he wasn't able to give us anything on that.
Yes, he did estimate, though, sir. I think he estimated the amount of mail that was affected by the overnight changes. He hasn't been able to do it. Well, he did also for the...
Well, he said that he was going to have 3 groups study it. Apparently, they're spending some money to do that.
Oh, you're talking...
I realize he made a guesstimate, but...
Yeah. Yes, based on that guesstimate, it's below the lower bound that they had formally estimated when they filed their case with us.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yeah, sure.
Let me just make sure we're all saying the same thing. I understood him to be talking roughly 4% in the first cut, the first reduction. Then that which will be implemented by the end of October, he was saying something like 7 to 8%, and we agreed that the total figure would be something like 10 to 11% would be affected.
There's a difference in the base we're using. He was talking about total first-class mail, and I am now talking about the amount of overnight committed mail, how much of that is going to be affected by the current change. They're equivalent numbers. They can be translated. But his 4.5% that he was talking about of all first-class mail is really equivalent to about 8.5% of the overnight mail.
I see.
Well, does your testimony then indicate that there would be a change in this advisory opinion as a result of that?
Well, I think that the Postal Service's actual implementation is fallen somewhat short of their intended their intentions back in September. I think, judging by what the Postmaster General said and by these numbers that we have, that it's a far more limited change than originally anticipated. And I think that they are concentrating largely in the areas where there are service problems, rather than having just a wholesale change in service standards to improve consistency. And insofar that they are...
Well, now, where do you get that information? Because I don't find that at all.
Well, I get that. I mean, I'm interpreting the Postmaster General by his remarks.
They promulgated these standards, and they put it into effect. One was put into effect in July of this year, and then another one's going to go in October, he said.
Right. I was just thinking that the scope of these changes are diminished significantly from what we were led to expect when they filed their case.
Well, haven't we got to get some more information before we can come to that kind of a conclusion?
Well, they did estimate how much...
I mean, this advisory opinion is based on almost like a trial, isn't it?
Yeah, it was very much like a trial. There was lots of data, lots of evidence presented, which will fill a file cabinet.
Well, now, just the Postmaster General saying that we haven't done all we said we're going to do, I don't think it's sufficient for you to change this.
Well, I'm not changing that. I'm just trying to explain the Postmaster General's, what I interpret his remarks to mean that he is... They think that their changes are in compliance, more or less, with what the Rate Commission had to say. He did say that in his prepared testimony, and I think it's because they are scaled back fairly sharply from their original plan, how much mail was going to be affected.
Well, on page 40, and what I have here is the United States
our decision.
of America Postal Rate Commission before the Commissioners, docket number N891, change in service 1989, first-class delivery service requirement advisory opinion concerning the proposed change in the nature of postal services. And that was dated July 25, 1990. That's
our opinion.
Advisory opinion. Mr. Chairman, normally I wouldn't ask to put this in the record, but I think we should because it is their advisory opinion, and that's what we're talking about. I realize that there's a lot of material in here, but I do think that it would be important for anyone looking at this record to have a copy of this to look at.
Certainly, without objection.
One of the things I want to call your attention to is the summary and conclusions on page 40, 1088, 1089, and 1090. The first one indicates, as indicated in chapters 1 and 3, the market research conducted by the Postal Service does not support the Postal Service's conclusion that postal customers will opt for a downgrading. And then the second one, the survey research utilized requested respondents to grapple with abstract concepts of speed and consistency. And then you question whether or not that was realistic. And then the last one, properly conducted market research directed toward assessing postal customer support for various balances of speed would remedy one of major problems with the realignment plan. So there's a serious question here as to the justification for making the change. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I agree with that, sir.
And that's what the advisory opinion was all about.
That's what the advisory opinion said. What I was trying to comment on is that I believe that the Postal Service has scaled back their actual implementation, the scope of that actual implementation.
Well, now, did they do that in 3 days?
Well, I think
you put this out, and then it went into effect within 3 days.
I think that they had planned to do that regardless of our decision, is my guess. I don't think they modified it after our decision was issued. I think they modified it throughout the process. They filed their case with us,
All right,
and the mailers became aware of what was going on and complained. The Postal Service then entered into discussions with the large mailers, which continued in parallel, basically, with our proceeding. And finally, the Postal Service scaled back.
Well, now, having issued an advisory opinion, which you've done and which is on the record now, do you have any control over or have any recourse to get additional information as a result of these studies and that sort of thing?
No.
Or are you out of the picture now?
We're out of the picture.
So you're done, unless they make another request. Let's see what else I wanted to ask you. I mail a letter to somebody in Los Angeles. Can I expect under this new scheme one-day delivery in Los Angeles?
I'm not an expert on their service standards all over the country, but I believe you should get overnight service within Los Angeles.
No, I'm in Washington,
Oh,
D.C.
no, that is 3 days.
What do I expect now?
3 days.
So any city outside of 100 miles, I have to expect 3 days.
Well, no, some would be 2 days if they're in reasonable. The criteria is we put in our decision. There's overnight service, 2-day service, and 3-day service.
Well, now, if it does happen to get there in 1 day, well, then it's not consistent.
Well,
Will they check it that way too?
the Postal Service considers consistency the maximum number of days it takes to be delivered.
I see. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Horton. A couple of quick questions, Mr. Cohen. Did the Postal Service ever submit a revised plan to you? You've noted that they seemingly downsized the scope of what they were intending to do. Was there ever a revision submitted to the Postal Rate?
I don't believe so.
And in has the Postal Rate or has the Postal Service submitted to you anything dealing with second-class standards?
Well, there were some comments in our record supplied by the Postal Service that no second-class mail which currently receives overnight service would be affected by these service changes for a period of 1 year. is to give the publishers enough time to make alternative plans.
Implying that after 1 year, things could be changing.
Yes.
Now, if things do change, is the Postal Service required to come to you in any way, either for an advisory opinion or for something more definite, for an approval, for instance?
I don't know, David.
Mr. Chairman, I'll take a crack at that. I think it would turn on whether the Postal Service proposed to make the changes as an explicit plan to change the service for second-class mail. In other words, if they said, having done it for first in 1990, we now have an idea of how we ought to redo second-class service standards nationwide, then they would presumably have to come before the Commission for an advisory opinion. If it were simply an outgrowth of what they did to first class, for example, because the transportation lash-ups are the same for the two classes, then I think it's more doubtful that there would be any necessity for an independent advisory on the second-class change.
Now, in your ongoing proceeding, your rate proceeding, you testified that Postal Service has stated that they can't make a projection based on this. Does the Postal Rate Commission have under its own authority the ability to look at this and analyze what the implications would be for rates?
I prefer David to answer this.
We very often will ask, not just in rate cases, but in any hearing case, we will address information requests to the Postal Service. We will say, please provide any estimates you have of the savings from such and such a program, for example, and give it to us within 10 days or 20 days. My recollection is, I'm not quite sure of this, but my recollection is that in this case we have asked the Postal Service at least to tell us when they would have certain final financial figures for 1990, with the idea that those might enlighten the record in the rate case. And if there were any current savings, they would presumably show up in those numbers.
Would they be earmarked as such?
That I'm more doubtful of. Let me get some help, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly.
Probably they would not be separately identified.
Well, if I'm
Just so, excuse me,
Ms. Wharton.
Just so we're clear on this, your answer to this question doesn't have anything to do with the question of standards now. You're just talking about the rate case, right?
No, sir. We're just talking about, as I understand it, just about cost savings, if any, that might be showing up at a point where the Postal Service could actually make an estimate of them before the close of the record in the rate case.
Well, I guess my concern is that I hope you can understand. My concern is that I live in a rural community. I'm going to be asked to cough up 20% more for postage, and yet at the same time I'm going to get my mail at least a day later under the new standards. That's consistently a day later. And so my feeling is then what am I getting for this? And are there some savings coming out of it? Show me something tangible. So far all the American public sees is a day later in service and no savings. And so I would hope that the Postal Rate Commission would be willing to pursue that. Sorry.
Yes, sir.
But would you yield also?
Certainly.
In other words, I think what the chairman is asking, and I think we're all concerned about that, are there any cost savings with regard to this standardization or new standard plan? And the Postmaster General said that there wasn't any, and that was not any consideration. Are you still holding the door open?
We are always glad to receive Postal Service information on costs, even if it comes in.
I understand that. If they say they make a saving, they'll send it in. But I think the chairman was trying to find out, do you have any hook on which you can hang your hat to get additional information with regard to whether or not there's any savings? Isn't that what you're asking?
Well, the mechanism that I described, the information request, is what we normally use. As you know, Mr. Horton, we don't have compulsory process at the Postal Rate
Well, do you
Commission.
intend to ask for that information?
I think if there is a realistic possibility, we would look at it. Yes,
Well, Well, Mr. Cohen answered my question earlier and said there's no way that you can go back and get any additional information. Now there seems to be a little bit of a door open where we could perhaps get a little more information.
I think
Can we get more information?
maybe Mr. Cohen was referring to additional information for the N89 case. Is that?
That's right.
Well, look,
we-
let's don't be playing games. I mean, we're trying to find out some information. I want to find out, can you get information from the Postal Service as to whether or not they're living up to these standards? And if one of the ways you can do it is to find out whether or not there have been any cost savings, then I think that would be helpful. Can you do it?
We can ask for that information, yes. That certainly is.
Do you intend to ask for it? I mean, they're going to make a big full-scale study here with 3 organizations. They're paying, well, one of them is going to get $20 million. I don't know how much they're going to give the others. He's going to furnish us that information. But I would think that that would be important to determine whether or not there are any cost savings.
Mr. Horton, let me be sure that I understand your question. Are you asking it within the context of the current rate case, which will be over about the end of this calendar year, or are you asking it on a longer time frame?
Yeah, that's what we're asking.
As a member of the staff, I would say that the Commission certainly can ask for information that the Postal Service might have as to the financial results of the realignment. And I would think that it would be appropriate for them to provide it. The Postal Service test-year cost witness stated on the record that it can't be estimated until the standards have been determined. And that has just now happened, as you know, on July 28th for the overnight mail. It's going to be happening in, I think, October, Mr. Franks said, for the second-day mail. And it is possible that they would have estimates soon enough to do us some good, to do the record some good.
Will the gentleman yield? Let me just cut through it. We're making a request that you pass on to the Postal Rate Commission, that they ask for this information, that they ask for it specifically as to what cost savings will result, so the American public can get some justification for why they're getting a nickel more on the stamp and their mail a day later. That's what we're asking. And we're asking if you would transmit that to the Postal Rate Commission. Thank you.
We certainly will.
Is that all right, Mr. Horton?
That's fine.
Thank you. So, any further questions? No. We want to thank you very much, and I think Mr. Horton's idea is an excellent one about the advisory opinion as well as your statements will be included in the record. We appreciate your help in preparation for this, Mr. Stover, Mr. Cohen. Thank you. The next panel will present a broad view of the new standards. We will have testifying Stephen A. Gold, Director of the Office of Consumer Advocate, U.S. Postal Rate Commission. We'll have no stranger to postal matters and to advocacy of postal matters, Mo Biller, President of the American Postal Workers Union, AFL-CIO. John Mapley, the General Manager of the Photo Finishing Group, the Nashua Corporation, based in Parkersburg, West Virginia, with an important facility there. And Carrie H. Baer, the Vice President of Distribution, the Reader's Digest Association, Incorporated. Gentlemen, we're pleased to have you with us. As I've mentioned to other witnesses, the subcommittee has a practice of swearing in all witnesses so as not to prejudice any who may appear before it. If you would stand and raise your right hand. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Each of your statements will be made a part of the record. Why don't we go simply in order as listed on the agenda. We'll begin with Stephen Gold, Director of the Office of Consumer Advocate, U.S. Postal Rate Commission. Mr. Gold.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Horton, thank you for inviting me today. Before I get to my prepared remarks, I'd just like to address one quote, which the Postmaster General cited 4 times, and that is to the non-event
Your
status.
non-event has become quite an event.
Yes, it has. And just for the record, I'd like to read exactly what I said in my written testimony. I said, with respect to the consumer, this is page 6 of my prepared remarks, sir. First full paragraph. I said, with respect to the consumer, this entire realignment process may turn out to be a non-event since only about 5% of the overnight first-class mail will be affected. Then I went on to say, of course, the new standards for the 2-day delivery areas have not yet to be implemented, and so on. I'd like to emphasize the word may in that sentence. I think the jury is still out on this question. And certainly with respect to the consumer, depending on the area in which he lives, it could be an event. And certainly with respect to businesses that have larger volumes of mail, it could certainly be an event. So I just want to set the record straight about this, quote, non-event. There are times when perception is more important than reality. And I think you made this point, Mr. Chairman. And I believe this observation applies to the Postal Service's change in service standards. For whatever the reality is, the perception on the part of the American public is that rates are going up at the same time service is going down. At a time when the Postal Service is trying to improve its image, this is a public relations fiasco. In my opinion, and opinion of my office, and the Commission agreed, the Postal Service should not have proceeded on a nationwide plan. Considering the fact that it was meeting its overnight service standards 93% of the time, there was no need for a nationwide change. The service could have focused on those areas where its performance was well under the 95% standard, the real problem areas, such as New York and Chicago. If it had proceeded in such a manner, no advisory opinion from the Commission would have been required, and the adverse publicity could have been avoided. But once having decided to change standards nationally, the service should have conducted a cost-benefit analysis. The service provided no information that would enable the outside observer to evaluate whether the New York experiment or the National Realignment Plan would make postal customers better off. The service's attempt to show that its plan would be viewed as an improvement by customers consisted of two statements. One, that customers prefer consistency to speed of delivery, and two, customers only need speedy delivery in their local areas. From these vague and not very believable observations, the service leaped to the conclusion that a one-day delay in volume, no matter how great, of non-local first-class mail was acceptable if it produced any improvement, no matter how small, in consistency. Similarly, the major defect in the service's market research approach to realigning delivery areas was that it cannot evaluate the trade-off between speed and consistency. The plan proposed by the service simply assumed that constricting overnight delivery areas would automatically improve consistency, and that any improvement in consistency is worth any sacrifice in speed. The service never asked its survey customers how much speed they would be willing to forego in exchange for an incremental improvement in consistency. The service never even asked its survey respondents what they thought consistency meant. By simply asking respondents to vote for speed or consistency, the service passed up the opportunity to find out how much speed respondents would trade for improved consistency. Without knowing the relative value that customers place on speed and consistency, the desirability of the realignment plan could never be properly evaluated. However, the real delivery problem with respect to the consumer was never really addressed in this case, and that is, why is more than 12% of the mail delivered in 4 or more days, when their standards say all mail should be delivered within a 3-day time span? That concludes my remarks, and if there are any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Gore.
Chairman, just so we got, where do you get that 12% figure? How do you?
That's in the Commission's decision, sir.
Pardon?
In the Commission's advisory opinion, that figure, 12%.
Thanks.
Mr. Biller, President of the American Postal Workers Union, AFL-CIO. Delighted to have you with us and invite you to proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, my name is Mo Biller, President of the American Postal Workers Union, AFL-CIO. Largest postal union in the world, currently representing more than 360,000 men and women throughout the United States and its territories. I thank you for inviting me to testify during these oversight hearings. I thank you for scheduling them. On July 28, 1990, the U.S. Postal Service changed its delivery standards for first-class mail nationwide. I cannot fathom the management thinking that first request a rate increase and then lower service standards across the nation, and I am not alone. The public sees us as providing less service at a higher cost, and every governmental body that has considered the Postal Service's plan has come out against it. But the Postal Service has not listened to anyone. American Postal Workers Union told the Postal Service early and often that it should abandon its ill-advised move toward reducing its standards for delivery of first-class mail. This is what I told the Postal Board of Governors on January 8, 1990. There is simply no way to convince the public that service will be improved by officially sanctioning the delay of mail, and despite the public posturing, the Postal Service has not and does not make the delivery to our customers within the prescribed standards. Neither the existing nor the proposed revisions in service standards are commitments to home delivery. They measure delivery to the destinating postal facility. I cannot understand why the Postal Service did not make more limited local changes to meet what the Postal Service says is the public's desire for more predictable delivery. In fact, we had, in a very first meeting, when they were telling us what they were going to do, we raised the same question. Why go nationwide? You've started in New York. If you think it's going to work, and you want to try it in some other areas, well, do that and see what happens. But the Postal Service did not listen to me. The Postal Service requested an advisory opinion from the Postal Rate Commission. After months of hearings on July 25, 1990, the Commission issued its opinion. The Commission concluded, based on a record before us, we find the Postal Service's proposed nationwide reductions in service levels are not justified. We advise the Postal Service not to implement the realignment plan nationwide. The market research on which the service based its conclusions is inadequate to advise the service to proceed. This research does not measure customer support for the proposed realignment and is subject to a number of technical criticisms. Further, no cost justification was developed to allow evaluation of the impact of the proposed realignment of the cost of the Postal Service and to its customers. But the Postal Service did not listen to the Postal Rate Commission either. Then the Senate Appropriations Committee responded to the Postal Service implementation of the revised delivery standards. The committee adopted the following resolution: an FY 91 appropriations bill covering the Postal Service, H.R. 5241. The Commission is aware that the Postal Service implemented a realignment program on July 30, 1990, which reduced prior mail delivery standards. The lack of timely first-class mail service, which will result from the realignment, greatly concerns the committee. The committee therefore directs that the Postal Service to suspend the delivery standard realignment and re-implement the former one-day and two-day delivery standard for first-class mail until the Postal Service demonstrates that cost savings will occur and identifies the impact on affected communities. But the Postal Service did not listen to the Senate Appropriations Committee either. Now this subcommittee is holding hearings on the implementation by the United States Postal Service of these new standards for the delivery of first-class mail. Yet another governmental body is trying to figure out the rationale behind these changes and their effect on a mailing public. I believe that at the end of these hearings, this subcommittee will come to the same conclusion as the APW, the Postal Rate Commission, and the Senate Appropriations Committee, that the Postal Service's market research was inadequate, not justifying the nonsensical decision to, quote, improve an, unquote, service by officially sanctioning the delay of mail, and that the Postal Service has failed to present any cost justification for a nationwide deterioration of service standards, especially when it is seeking a rate hike. I believe that at the end of these hearings, this subcommittee will agree with the APW and the Rate Commission. Some readjustments in local service standards may be necessary to correct specific problems, such as illogical service commitments or inefficient service requirements in particular locations. These few local problems should be fixed locally. No nationwide change in service standards is justified. The number of changes being made is enormous. While the Postal Service claims that only 1 to 5% of the first-class mail volume will be affected by the lower standards, the APW's rough calculation was that approximately 40% of the places now that get overnight mail will have service reduced to 2-day delivery. The magazine Antique Week, and I ask that the committee enter this into the record because it goes through every single sectional center in the United States and pairs it up to show what the real effects are. For each postal, analysis in Antique Week showed for each postal division how many previously overnight pairs will now have 2-day delivery. For example, in the Charleston, West Virginia division, 52 sectional center facilities will continue to exchange mail overnight, while 78 more that previously had overnight service will now have 2-day service. In the Oklahoma City division, 42 sectional center facility pairs will continue to have overnight delivery service, while 73 that previously did are reduced to 2-day service. In the San Diego, California division, 6 sectional center facility pairs will still have overnight delivery between them, but 12 that previously had overnight delivery have only 2-day service now. As a matter of fact, in the Western New York division, which includes Buffalo, Rochester, Jamestown, and Elmira sectional center facilities, it now only has 14 sectional center facility pairs with which it exchanges mail overnight. 10 pairs that formerly received overnight service now receive 2-day treatment. The Rochester sectional center facility alone, which previously had 7 facilities with overnight delivery standards, only has 3, according to the Antique Week statistics.
Excuse me, Mr. Biller, without objection, that will be entered in the record. And I might just note, Mr. Horton, Mr. Biller certainly has a way of targeting his testimony, doesn't he?
Oh, yeah, he does.
Well, we could have done.
Where we live.
You wouldn't give me the time to do what Antique Week has done, and that's performed a real service, and I really don't know who they are. It's unfortunate, but just a little bit more. I believe that at the end of these hearings, the subcommittee will find that the Postal Service pursuit of nationwide changes in the face of neither demonstrated need nor demonstrated cost savings can only injure the name and reputation of the Postal Service by playing into the hands of those who wish to destroy the U.S. Postal Service for the benefit of the privatizers. Finally, I believe that the members of this subcommittee should do more than issue another scathing report criticizing the Postal Service's latest wrong-headed move. The Postal Service just does not listen. The service has already ignored the American Postal Workers Union, Postal Rate Commission, the Senate Appropriations Committee. The only thing that the U.S. Postal Service will listen to, the only thing the Postal Service must listen to, is legislation. I realize these are oversight hearings, but as individual congressional members, I certainly think there's a lot more that can be done. Therefore, I ask the members of the subcommittee to take legislative action to roll back the Postal Service's lowering of standards for delivery service to the American public. I ask you to do the only thing that is guaranteed to get the U.S. Postal Service to listen. Pass legislation to prevent them from slowing down the mail nationwide. I thank you. I had also asked them, and I just want to add this and leave it, if you're doing 93% overnight delivery, why don't you do like Avis's long-standing slogan and cliche, try to make it a little better, and we want to help. Response falls on deaf ears. It is my considered opinion, only mine, and it's an opinion, that not only is slower delivery not improved mail service, but I believe it is being done, and we have never opposed automation. We still don't. I believe they're not sure themselves, and this will give them an opportunity to mass much more mail in particular areas before putting it in to all of this expensive equipment. And the challenge continues to remain at all times. Are you using automation to speed up the mail? Are you using it just to eat up the mail? And that's what we have to understand, because the public will never understand slower service, especially when I don't believe it has to be slower. We're the people that do the work, and we don't think it should be slower. If that's management's easy escape route, then something should be done about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Biller. Next will be Mr. Mapley, representing the Nashua Corporation.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Representative Horton, Representative English, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Matley. I am the General Manager of Nashua Corporation's Photo Finishing Group. Under the trading names of York, TruePrint and Scott, we operate the largest mail-order photo finishing business in the world. We are the market leader in all the countries where we trade, namely the US, Canada and the UK. I've been involved in the marketing and management of this type of mail-order business for the past 16 years. Nashua is greatly dismayed over the impact of the Postal Service's first-class realignment program, particularly the effect it will have first on our mail-dependent business and second on our 6 million customers. Nashua has studied the potential impact of these changes on our business. We look at the volume of mail we receive in our post office boxes around the country, which will now arrive at our processing facility in Parkersburg, West Virginia, a day later. Surprisingly, we find that 1/3 of the mail received on an overnight basis is now downgraded to second day. In our view, this is very significant. It is in direct contrast to a total erosion, according to the Postmaster General, of less than 5% from 55.5% to 50.7%. I have brought color-coded maps of Nashua's post office boxes for incoming orders. Look at the percent of mail from our customers in the Northeast into Boston that used to arrive in one day, which will now take 2 days. 34% of the mail that arrived overnight will now take 2 days from our customers. We have maps here covering other areas and have also taken the liberty of creating maps for the SCFs in your district, Mr. Chairman, and also yours, Mr. Horton, and also for Mr. English. This clearly represents and illustrates the impact that these changes in first-class mail delivery standards will have on your constituents. And as an example, for Boston and for us living in Nashua, it's only 50 miles, 45 miles from Nashua to Boston, but it's now going to take 2 days instead of 1 day to get a letter there. What is even more alarming to Nashua is that this degradation is but the first step in a process that will cause further erosion of quick mail service. Based on the data furnished by the Postal Service, when they implement the second phase of this program, the total impact of the first-class realignment program will be that 9% of the overnight mail volume will be degraded to second-day delivery, 24% of the second-day mail volume will be degraded to third-day delivery, and third-day delivery will therefore increase by an amazing figure of at least 47%. The Postal Service rationalized that these changes will improve service because it will afford customers greater certainty as to when their mail will be delivered. Nashua's extensive experience in the mail order industry conflicts with the concept that the certainty of later delivery is considered a service quality enhancer. In our business 6 years ago, our in-plant turnaround time was 4 to 5 days. Our volume was 1/3 of what it is today. Since then, management focused its attention on reducing the time the customers' orders were in process. While it is not the only factor, we found that there is a direct correlation between the door-to-door turnaround time and the number of customers who will repeatedly use our service. Nashua's experience has proven over and over again in the US and abroad that quick turnaround, along with low cost and consistently good quality, are the key factors in pleasing customers and ensuring their continued patronage. Allow me to illustrate. In our UK mail order photo finishing business, the average door-to-door turnaround is 6 days, and the mail order portion of the photo finishing market is 22%. In the US, that time span goes up from 6 to 8 days, and the mail order share of the market is 10% instead of 22%. While in Canada, that turnaround time is 14 days, with a correspondingly lower market share for mail order photo finishing of only 6%. These data help to illustrate that postal customers place great importance on the expedient receipt of their mail. That leads us to question the statistical validity of the survey on which the Postal Service relied upon to draw the conclusion that slowing down of first-class delivery times will be perceived by customers as a service improvement. Can the Postal Service's experience
with the customer preference for speedy delivery be that dramatically different from Nashua's? It is even more perplexing and troublesome that this service degradation is not cost-justified. On the pragmatic level, it is difficult to think of an explanation for slower service at a higher cost. On a financial basis, there seems to be even less justification for erosion of speedy delivery without a corresponding reduction in price. Isn't this the crux of the matter? It is also interesting to note that from 1971, the time that the prior service standards were first established until now, commercial air transport availability, frequency and capacity in the US has expanded dramatically. One would have hoped that consideration of delivery standards for mail would now enable universal overnight or at most 2-day service instead of the sharp reduction with which we are now faced. Thus, while any market share erosion for mail order photo finishing is of obvious concern to Nashua, it should be equally troubling to the Postal Service. Our industry represents approximately $50 million in annual revenue to them. The first-class realignment program is detrimental to all mailers and recipients of mail, especially those in the outlying areas of the country to whom mail is somewhat of a lifeline. In Nashua's view, this service degradation should never have been implemented, and its effects should be remedied by legislation mandating the restoration of the former first-class delivery standards. I have forcibly expressed our views on this matter. I must conclude by saying that we work hard in cooperation with the Postal Service in many ways to our mutual benefit. We expect to foster a continuation of this partnership, and indeed we have a meeting at a senior level with the Postal Service next week. Thank you for your kind attention and the opportunity afforded to Nashua to express its views on this issue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mapley. Our final witness will be Kerry H. Baer, Vice President of Distribution with the Reader's Digest Association. Mr. Baer.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Kerry Baer. I am Vice President of Distribution for the Reader's Digest Association. In this capacity, I am responsible for the development and coordination of Reader's Digest postal policy. I am pleased to be here today to comment on the Postal Service's proposed change to first-class delivery standards. The Reader's Digest Association is a global publisher and direct mail marketer of magazines, books, and home entertainment products. Because we are a direct mail marketer, we are a significant user of the U.S. Postal Service. We use the postal system to advertise and sell our products, ship orders to our customers, and then bill them for our products. One of our largest corporate expenses is postage. Our annual U.S. postage bill is in excess of $100 million. What is not generally known is that the largest portion of our postage bill is for first-class mail usage. When one considers both the first-class usage from Reader's Digest to its customers and then from our customers back to us, we account for over 400 million pieces of first-class mail annually. Quite obviously, we have a significant stake in a reliable, efficient first-class mail service. To the heart of the question, it has been and remains our corporate position that given a reasonable level of speed, consistency of mail delivery is the most important element of mail service. With the many changes taking place at the Postal Service, a strategic plan, and a major automation program, we believe it is entirely appropriate and in fact good business practice for the Postal Service to review and change service standards when study results so indicate. We believe that attempts to meet today's standards have resulted in both unnecessary expense to the Postal Service and extreme variability in delivery service, which has caused serious problems to customers and adversely affected postal credibility and morale. It is our understanding that for the country as a whole, the proposed new service standards will shift perhaps 5% of one-day service mail to two-day service and perhaps 5% to three-day service. In addition, we note that as part of the introduction of these service standards, there are two significant changes. The consistency goal for meeting the standard is being raised from the current 95% level to the 96% level. And perhaps most important to this entire project is that the Postal Service will, for the first time, have an independent external measurement of the level of delivery service being provided to consumers and business. While changes to first-class delivery service standards are presumably not being made for cost-saving benefits, it does appear that these changes should result in significant cost reduction opportunities for the Postal Service. For whatever reason, the Postal Service has chosen not to enumerate these savings. However, we believe they supplement the consumer service aspects of the equation and provide a significant additional reason to proceed with the changes. In addition to the Postal Service savings, we at Reader's Digest think a change to service standards makes sense because we expect that a more consistent service will result in a net savings to many large and small users of the mails. Let me explain. Over the years, we have learned that slow service is the primary cause of customer service complaints and inquiries. But to the point, it is the inconsistent service that one time delivers a letter between 2 locations in 2 days and at another time in 6 days that is particularly harmful. We expect that any modest slowdown in mail delivery speed and its resulting financial impact on remittance float will be more than compensated for by a reduced level of customer inquiries being caused by inconsistent service. In conclusion, while the Reader's Digest Association supports the Postal Service's proposed changes to first-class delivery service, we do so under the following conditions. The first-class mail delivery review process, now underway, will continue to be thoughtful, reasonable, and meaningful. The Postal Service will continue to utilize an independent outside organization to audit first-class delivery service levels. The results of these audits will be made public, and there will be a close monitoring of all cost savings resulting from the service alignments. Finally, we understand the political difficulty the Postal Service had in proposing that some mail be delivered in more rather than less time, particularly as it is about to ask the public to pay higher postage rates. Nevertheless, we think it would be foolish for the Postal Service to try to meet standards which are no longer attuned to modern logistics and automated mail handling methodologies, particularly one that is costly, not necessarily customer-based, and not possible to meet without significant expenditures of scarce funds and the resulting inflation in postal prices. Therefore, we support the Delivery Realignment Program because of its potential to significantly improve consistency of delivery and reduce Postal Service expense while having only modest impact on speed. We hope you have found our comments helpful, and we would certainly be pleased to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Greatly appreciate your participation, Mr. Baer. Mr. Baer, let me ask you, of the panel here, and I think also in the process before the Postal Rate Commission, the Reader's Digest Corporation seemed to stand alone in its support of the slower standards. And at the time of its filing with the Postal Rate Commission, Reader's Digest conditioned its support, in part at least, on the Postal Service's, including in the current rate case, a projection of cost savings resulting from this realignment. How do you regard the slower standards now that it is evident that the Postal Service did not account for those cost savings from the realignment in the current rate proceedings?
Well, first of all, I think we're certainly disappointed that the Postal Service did not include any potential savings in the rate case proceeding. We understand some of the reasons for them not doing that. Their claim that it was impossible to determine how much could be saved without completing their analysis of the change. But we think that some even rather broad level analysis would have indicated the level of savings. There's a significant amount of equipment being installed in the Postal Service, and yet when one travels through many postal facilities, as I have, you often see it idle during the day. And we think that much of that idleness is related to the fact that they're trying to meet some service standards. We think that some modest modification to the service standards would permit much greater utilization of the equipment. And secondly, with respect to the service standards, I think on the one hand we have issues of what are the standards, and on the other hand we have the issues of what is the reality. And we do some very extensive surveying. We survey about 800 pieces of mail each week in several locations around the country, and in our opinion the Postal Service is not meeting today's standards, so that we think that the standards that are being proposed for many mailers in this country would be a significant improvement over the current level of service. And given the external monitoring that's being proposed, we think that would be very significant, because this committee and other organizations, perhaps 6 months or a year from now, when the availability of the Price Waterhouse surveys are in, could certainly call into question, well, this is your standard and this is your service. Let's take a hard look and compare them.
In terms of what it is that you seek to accomplish versus, say, Mr. Mapley with Nashua, am I correct that you all might approach this somewhat differently, in that Reader's Digest in a publication like that is not as time sensitive getting to the door as someone who mails in negatives and then wants quick turnaround time and then gets them back at their house?
I'd like to repeat what I said, that although we are certainly known as a magazine publisher, the Reader's Digest magazine accounts for less than half of our business in the United States, and our largest single mailing cost and mailing quantity is first-class mail, is the mailing of remittances back and forth to our consumers and consumer inquiries to us. We certainly think speed is very, very important. We would love to have overnight delivery on everything we send, because as the gentleman from Nashua Corporation has commented, and we're aware too, the better service that you can provide, the more likely you are to get repeat customers. And we've also undertaken significant effort to improve time and process, as we call it. But we think that within a certain bound, time and process, there's not that much of a difference noted by a customer. But when the letter from Washington, as Mr. Horton said, is supposed to get from Washington to Los Angeles in 3 days, and it consistently gets there in 3 days, that's fine. When it takes 8 days is when we start to generate significant expenses, because we're going to get complaints, inquiries from our customers, and we might lose that customer. So we really do think that consistency is critical.
Mr. Mapley, has Nashua Corporation been solicited by private competitors of the Postal Service for some of your shipping business?
Yes, we frequently get solicitations from other carriers.
And does what you're reporting to the subcommittee today, does that cause you to ponder anew whether or not to sign up with private carriers?
Well, it's very difficult for us to do so, because to get our product back to our customers, we really have to use the Postal Service, so that while we talk with other carriers and use them for some bulk carryings, in terms of the individual packets, we can't. And when our customers mail work into us, of course, then they have to use the Postal Service, and they use first-class mail. Can I just briefly refer to that map, just to clarify a situation? I should say that the yellow and green portions on that map, which is the Northeast, it's Massachusetts and New Hampshire and so on, customers living there mail their work to us to our Boston post office box. And the green and yellow areas all did get overnight delivery, or that was the standard, into Boston. And since the change in delivery standards, only the green portion now gets overnight delivery to Boston. So all of those yellow areas above, even up into Maine and down into Rhode Island, that is now all second-day delivery.
Mr. Biller, as you know, I think one of my major concerns about slower standards is the implication for rural areas. And I just wondered whether you think that I'm justified in those concerns.
My opinion, you certainly are justified. I refer to it as a stamp tax on rural areas. I see this as a continuing deterioration in the concept of universal service, which is why the Postal Service was instituted originally, even by the Founding Fathers and later by the private express statutes. I cannot see that consistent slower service means any different than what it does, as that's slower service. Moreover, let me say this, and history may not be important to everybody every day today, although it's being made everywhere in this world. But if you trace back the history of postal delivery, and I'm not arguing whether we think it's attuned to the times or not. When I was a young boy, there were 5 deliveries a day. Then they went to 4, then they went to 3, then they went to 2, and there's 1 delivery a day. And now they're talking, the talk is, well, overnight delivery to second day. And I can foresee, at the rate that this is going, where someday, to some people, they will be able to argue that deliveries 3 days a week in particular areas are good enough, because it may, whatever the reason is for doing it, it'd be 3 days a week, 2 days a week, and get to 1 day a week. And that's exactly what is happening here. And these are concerns. We support the postal rate increase. Yes, we do. People will say for other reasons. It's not a fact. We only support it because the law says they must break even. I'm not going to go into how the Postal Service has been hit for $1,245 million by our Treasury, and I don't think it's gone into the Treasury anyway. But beyond all that, our concerns are very much so about the public getting slower service, because who gets blamed? Nobody talks about the supervisor or the postmaster general. They'll talk about the postal worker. So I say your concerns are exceptionally valid, and I think they're valid beyond rural areas. I'm not sure, for example, what it does in terms of the financial community, because from what I understand, is about $100 billion goes through the mail service every single day. So I don't know what it does to a float or anything else. And I was distressed to hear that there was no interest or concern about cost effectiveness, while the same Postmaster General talks every single day about costs and cost restraints and cost effectiveness. This was not even a matter for them to look into, other than to improve service as they make it slower, and the big capital investments, which they even tell us may not be realized until 2005. And I remember not so long ago, a Postmaster General introduced the bulk mail center network. That was 21 bulk mail centers in a postal service just not quite 20 years ago, that was supposed to improve and bring back the parcel post business to the United States Postal Service. Today, the Postal Service handles less than 5% of the parcel post business, and you do have a private sector monopoly. The trail is left behind, the transient Postmaster General leaves, and this is what we remain with. And if he's talking about what you'll see in 2005, I wonder what's going to happen in the intervening 15 years. And surely slower service is no way to get customer satisfaction. I can't believe that. I don't think anybody believes it or understands it.
Thank you. Mr. Horton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As far as I can determine, Mr. Baer, your Reader's Digest, for whom I have a lot of regard and respect, is really one of the voices in the wilderness, so to speak, except for the Postal Service or the management of the Postal Service on this. And I notice you do have a number of conditions on your support for this. And I wondered how critical that survey or that question with regard to cost savings is to your company with regard to the Postal Service. They've apparently ignored it. The Postmaster General said today that there was that's no issue at all. And apparently they've made no study of that, made no plans for any type of cost savings as a result of this.
We think it's important. I personally, in some prior positions, have been responsible for automated facilities and facilities that have had substantial investments in capital equipment. And if you can only utilize that equipment for 4 or 5 hours a day, you're not getting much of a return on your equipment.
I'd like to see the Postal Service come in here with the various suggestions that you made with regard to savings. That's one of the things I think would be very helpful in this overall system. I did ask the Postmaster General with regard to the difficulty that I have with regard to time, the question of time and certainty of and consistency. I mean, you're interested in consistency and in time too. Your problem has been that the time that they were supposed to be delivering mail had not been followed, apparently, according to your own personal surveys.
That's correct, yes.
And so I would assume that that's one of the reasons why you're willing to buy this argument that if you can give me consistency in 2 days, well, then I'll buy that. But what do we have to to assure us that you're going to get that consistency record. We don't have that.
Well, I think that's a question that this committee may want to pose to the Postmaster General perhaps 6 months from now. Many companies in the direct mail industry, or many companies that use the mail, for example, in the banking industry, track their own incoming mail service, as we do. And there's always an issue between ourselves and the Postal Service about whose numbers are we looking at, and your numbers are somewhat flawed. And we have, over the years, shared every month our own internal numbers with the Postal Service. But now that there'll be an external measurement, presumably an independent Big Six now accounting firm that will be keeping track of these numbers, I think that very importantly there will be a standard on the table that everybody can say, this is the number, we've all agreed it's independent, you know, let's look at the record and see how you're doing.
Is your company cooperating on that or participating in that mailing industry survey, which apparently is being run by National Data Corporation?
Yes, we are. That is just beginning. It's being put together right now.
So you are planning to participate?
Yes, we are.
How about Mr. Mapley, of you? You're not.
Mr. Horton, we spend a lot of time and effort keeping track of service, not only our internal service, but our external service. We do mailings externally that are seated, as they say, so we can determine how long it takes a letter to get from one location to another, and we do a lot of internal tracking back from our customers to us because that is critical to us.
Well, why won't you have a problem from New York to Los Angeles if it's going to take 3 days, where maybe today it's one day service?
Well, I doubt that it's one, and it's usually 3, but every once in a while it's 8, 9, or 10, and that's when we really hear it from our customers, because then it usually generates a follow-up letter, and we'd like to see that go away.
Thank you. Mr. Gold, I did ask the Postmaster General about that letter that you sent out. Did you consult with the Postal Service before you sent that letter? And I assume you sent that to all 50 states, did you?
That's correct, sir, and I did not consult with the Postal Service or the Postmaster General.
What was the purpose of that? Just to get information, or was it really to try to get them to lobby Congress against it?
Well, the purpose of it, sir, as I stated in my prepared remarks, was simply to notify the various consumer protection agencies in the various states to try to get more consumer representation and more of a grassroots participation in the Commission proceedings. As you know, I am charged with representing the interests of the general public, right, but very often it helps to get a wider representation from the states.
So you were soliciting that type of information for participation in the rate proposal that was made to the Rate Commission.
That's right. In the N89 case, I was advising them about the case and trying to tell them how to participate if they so chose.
Did you have any results from that?
Unfortunately, the only state that participated was the New York State Consumer Protection Board, who has been a consistent participant in many of the Commission proceedings. I did get a couple of letters from the states, but no further participation.
Is it your intention to follow up on these surveys that the Postmaster General commented about?
To the extent that the data is made available to the Commission and made available to the staff and to my office, we certainly will analyze it and do whatever we can to improve upon it or to analyze it further.
Would you normally be a recipient of that type of information, or would you have to solicit it?
Well, I only get what the Commission gets. I don't have any independent source of information. So if it's going to be made available to the Commission, it will be made available to me.
In other words, if it's not made public, you wouldn't have an opportunity to get it. If it's made public, then you'd, of course, get it.
That's correct, Mr. Horton.
Well, I'm sure it will be made public because we're going to make sure it gets made public. But so I guess you'll get a chance to look at it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Horton, and I want to thank our panel very much for coming. We may have some questions to submit to you in writing, and we greatly appreciate response on that. You've come, some of you, long ways and prepared excellent testimony in helping the subcommittee to understand this problem. I have a feeling we're going to be back. The Postmaster General said they were reviewing in 6 months, and I have a feeling we're going to be doing some reviewing too, and we look forward to hearing from you again. Thank all of you. And
members of the panel, and especially Mr. Biller. I've worked with him on a number of occasions, and it was a very fine statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Horton, also. I declare this hearing adjourned.
Very good.
Join us Sunday afternoon at about 4:15 p.m. Eastern Time for coverage of a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing. Members under the chairmanship of Senator Claiborne Pell of Rhode Island will be hearing about U.S. policy in the Middle East and the Persian Gulf region from James Baker, the Secretary of State. Coming up next on C-SPAN, it's highlights from the 20th annual meeting of NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws.
Good morning from Washington. You're watching